Okay, let's jump right in. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating source text called Minds, Machines, and Manipulation. Think of this explainer as an objective, investigative dossier into the invisible architecture of modern political manipulation. If you've ever found yourself wondering how the information we consume is curated, weaponized, and deployed during massive elections, well, you're in the right place. We're going to take a clear, totally impartial look at the digital dark arts and exactly how data, algorithms, and psychology all combined to completely rewire modern democracy.
Here's the roadmap for our analysis today. We're going to hit 6 key areas: the new information warfare, the anatomy of a data machine, the debates of 2016, the psychology of the voter, the present data architecture, and we'll wrap up with defending democratic consent.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the new information warfare. And really, this is about the death of the old democratic story.
So the old story we always told ourselves was pretty straightforward, right? People look at facts, evaluate them, and vote based on their interests. But that story? It's basically been shattered. And not because politicians suddenly started lying, they've always done that. It's because the delivery system completely transformed. Think about traditional propaganda. It's a broadcast, a giant megaphone in the town square where everyone sees the exact same ad. If it's false, journalists can call it out. But then we have the new reality: dark ads. Instead of a megaphone, it's a micro-targeted whisper. It's an invisible, highly customized emotional trigger placed directly into a voter's ear, and their neighbor literally never sees it. It is persuasion completely stripped of public accountability.
To really grasp the sheer scale of this shift, just look at this number: 87 million. That's the number of Facebook profiles harvested by Cambridge Analytica using what looked like an innocent little personality quiz app. And this wasn't just, basic demographic data like your age or zip code. It was the raw psychological material needed to build an entirely new kind of warfare. So, how did they actually build it? Let's look under the hood.
Moving to Section 2, Anatomy of a Data Machine and the Pipeline of Persuasion.
The source lays out this incredibly complex, 6-step data pipeline, and it shows exactly how a harmless like on a social media post gets transformed into an algorithmic vote. It starts by harvesting your behavior, then modeling your personality and matching that profile to public voter files. From there, they create these highly vulnerable voter segments. Once those segments are built, the dark ads are delivered and supercharged by the platform's algorithmic amplification. Basically, your digital footprint becomes the exact blueprint they use to manipulate you.
Now, the absolute engine of this machine is a technique called psychographic microtargeting. It involves segmenting voters into personality clusters based on the OCEAN model. That stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. By scoring you on these traits, campaigns stop targeting your neighborhood and start mapping your specific personal neuroses. So a voter with high neuroticism, they might be fed a fear-inducing ad about crime. Meanwhile, a voter with low agreeableness gets fed anti-establishment messaging. It actively searches for your unique emotional wound and just presses right on it.
This brings us to Section 3, the debates of 2016. The source acts as an impartial tribunal here, so we're going to look neutrally at the fierce debates surrounding the 2016 Brexit referendum and the U.S. elections.
On one side of the tribunal, we have the argument presented by nationalist strategists like Steve Bannon. His stance is emphatic. 2016 was not a manipulation at all. As he puts it, it was 17.4 million people finally being asked and answering. In this view, Brexit and the parallel populist movements in the US were completely rational, historically informed choices. It's the argument that voters were responding to genuine economic abandonment by global elites, and they simply used their collective voice to reject a system that ignored them.
But then, flip the coin. The source immediately contrasts that view with whistleblowers from inside the data machine, like Brittany Kaiser from Cambridge Analytica. Her argument? It absolutely was a systematic psychological operation. She states they were actively identifying psychological vulnerabilities to produce a predetermined political outcome. From her perspective, campaigns exploited a regulatory vacuum and used non-consensual data to essentially hack the electorate.
Now, regardless of which side of that debate you lean toward, the tactics themselves are undeniable. The dossier highlights what it calls the Atlantic transfer, how a very specific tactical playbook crossed the ocean from the Brexit architects straight to the U.S. election. We see the exact same anti-expert inoculation, which is essentially preemptively discrediting any fact-checkers. We see the immigration fear engine, relying on visceral, emotional images of threat. And my personal favorite, the elite populist paradox. This is where incredibly privileged, elite-educated leaders successfully brand themselves as the authentic voices of a working-class insurgency. It's a wildly effective strategic overlap.
Let's move to Section 4,
the psychology of the voter. Why does this machine actually work so well on us?
A massive piece of the puzzle is something called terror management theory. This is our innate psychological drive to seek security by identifying with a larger collective tribe, like a nation or a movement, whenever we are reminded of existential threats. This perfectly explains why emotionally charged, simple slogans like "Take Back Control" worked so flawlessly. They masterfully activated deep-seated anxieties of powerlessness. Because, when people feel threatened, we naturally run toward the safety of a strong, simplified collective identity.
And that psychological drive relies heavily on a strategy called grievance as identity. The source makes a really crucial distinction here. These political campaigns did not invent the genuine suffering caused by decades of deindustrialization or wage stagnation. That pain was and is very real. But what the data machine did was weaponize it. They harnessed that legitimate grievance, wrapped it into a rigid political identity, and supplied a manufactured enemy as the diagnosis. They essentially gave voters a tangible target for their very real anger.
We're pivoting from the past to the present now in Section 5, the present data architecture. Because here's the thing, the architecture of 2016 didn't vanish, it scaled.
When you track the evolution of the surveillance, it forms a continuous line. It starts back in 2012 with the birth of custom social media audiences, moving right into the deployment of those tools in 2016. But long after Cambridge Analytica was exposed and shut down in 2018, the machinery kept growing. Fast forward to 2024 and 2025, and we're looking at massive initiatives centralizing government data through entities like the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOJ, partnering with defense contractors like Palantir.
And the present danger outlined in the text is pretty stark. We are looking at the unprecedented integration of disparate government data. We're talking Social Security numbers, tax records, health and immigration files. Impartially speaking, regardless of your politics, the source warns this represents the most sophisticated voter mapping architecture in human history. With algorithmic outrage still the standard on social platforms, the real risk here is the capacity for targeted political retaliation and structural voter disenfranchisement on a massive scale.
So how does a society even respond to that? Let's move to our final section, defending democratic consent and the tools of resistance.
The text synthesizes what it calls counter-democracy, basically a regulatory firewall. This looks like treating media literacy as foundational infrastructure, much like they do in Finland's education system. It means strict platform regulation, like forcing the mandatory public archiving of all political ads so dark ads can't exist. It demands algorithmic accountability, forcing tech companies to prove their systems don't just blindly reward emotional manipulation. It means treating data rights as civil rights and refunding public service journalism to kill the information vacuums where conspiracy thrives. The overarching message here is actually incredibly empowering. The conditions that allow this manipulation are policy choices, and what was built by humans can absolutely be regulated by humans.
I want to end with this provocative, kind of haunting question from the source for you to reflect on as we think about the future of our democracy. If you can engineer consent, does consent mean anything at all? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions, keep critically evaluating the information you consume, and I will see you next time.